Which leads me off to a little tangent. You ready for a few pie charts? Can you handle some pie charts? We have this mistaken theory of social change. We have this mistaken theory of philanthropy and how to leverage your philanthropy. Our universe revolves around programs, right? And the idea is spend as little as possible on fundraising, under the logic that the less you spend on fundraising, the more money there is available for programs. Well, that makes sense if it's a zero-sum game. But if it's not a zero-sum game, then we have it backwards. And fundraising should be at the center of the universe, because fundraising is the one thing, the only thing that has the potential to multiply the dollars you donate into more money for programs. So I'm very excited about this. I did 3 new pie charts this morning. It's very rare for me to add new pie charts into this. So this is an experiment. So here's how we look at things. Here's how we look at overhead, right? This is a $10 million pie. 10% of it gets spent on overhead, or $1 million. That means 90%, or $9 million, is available for programs, for the cause. Here's what we think if we spend more money on overhead. Let's say we want to raise that overhead to 30%. Here's what we think happens. We think that now there's less money available for the cause, because now there's $3 million going into overhead and there's only $7 million available for the cause. But that's not, if the organization does it right, what actually happens. What actually happens, if you make that kind of investment in fundraising in particular, is the pie gets bigger. And the investment in overhead doubles the size of the pie to $20 million. So yes, your overhead is 30%. It's higher than 10%. But the amount of money available for programs now is no longer $9 million. The amount of money available for programs is $14 million. That's how it actually works. It's not a zero-sum game. You can make the pie bigger, and fundraising is the thing that makes the pie bigger. And if we want to solve some of these social problems, we had better start to make the pies bigger. I'll give you an example. The AIDS rides that I told you about. We launched the first California AIDS ride with a $50,000 investment. Within 8 years, we had turned that into $108 million net, a multiplication factor of 1,982 times the initial investment. We started the breast cancer 3 days with a $350,000 investment of risk capital. Within 5 years, we turned that $350,000 into $194 million. Net, unrestricted money for breast cancer research, a multiplication factor of 554 times the initial investment. Now, if you're a philanthropist or you're a foundation really interested in breast cancer, what makes more sense? Go out and find the best breast cancer researcher in the world and give her $350,000 to do research, and essentially buy $350,000 worth of breast cancer research. Or give that $350,000 to a carefully thought out fundraising plan at her organization and have that turn potentially into $194 million for breast cancer research. And then you get your money back. So there's a lot of talk these days in the nonprofit sector about this phrase capacity building. Let's start to invest in the infrastructure of organizations. Even that we have slightly wrong, because if you look at the categories of capacity building, there are things like finance and accounting, fundraising, human resources, leadership training, strategic planning, and technology. Only one of those things, fundraising, has the capability of multiplying the amount of money put into it. So investments in fundraising can not only multiply the amount of money available for programs, investment in fundraising can multiply the amount of money available for the other elements of capacity building. So fundraising actually builds capacity to build capacity. The third category of problem, to get back on our 1, 2, 3 track with this question about overhead percentages, is it gives donors really bad information, which is tragic because the only reason we use it is we think it's giving us good information. So first, it operates on a mistaken theory of waste. So a charity tells you 95 cents of your dollar goes to the cause, and you think, wow, that's great. I know that they don't waste any of my money, right? No, you don't. how do you know they're not wasting the 95% that they spend on the cause? That's where all the money's going. That's where the biggest opportunity for waste actually is. Related to that is, it tells you nothing about the quality of the services they provide. So let's look at the crude example of two soup kitchens, A and B, right? And A tells you 10% of your donation goes to overhead, 90% goes to the cause. B tells you only 70% goes to the cause. Well, we've all been trained to think that A is by far the better soup kitchen. In fact, we kind of get angry at soup kitchen B. You know, how come you're spending 30% on overhead when soup kitchen A is able to do it at 10 cents on the dollar? But what if we actually went and visited those two soup kitchens and we found that soup kitchen A was serving rancid soup in a dilapidated facility with a really unfriendly staff? And soup kitchen B was in a state-of-the-art facility. They're serving hearty, nutritious soup. They have a super friendly staff. They're always open, and they do case management. Well, now it's clear you should have given your money to soup kitchen B. So the question, what percentage of my donation goes to the cause versus overhead, would have betrayed you utterly and completely in terms of determining which was the better institution to send your money to. The Better Business Bureau in 2002 did a survey asking the public, what do you think overhead should be? That's like asking the public how long they think thoracic surgery should take and then using that as a standard for thoracic surgeons. And what does the general public know about this? You know, and they asked people, what information do you most want before you give money to charity? And 79% of people said, I want to know how much of the money goes to programs. Only 6% said, I want to know if the money makes a difference. Now, why would that be? Well, we have managed to confuse the public into thinking that the two things are the same. We keep telling them that the charities with the low overhead are the good charities. You hear good, you think effective. So if you hear that the charity has low overhead, you don't think you need to know anything more because you think, well, they are effective. When in fact, you know, the nonprofit overhead cost study at Indiana University and Forces for Good and all of the other studies show no, the organizations that are investing in infrastructure are the better organizations. We don't do this with anything else in the economy. We don't, you know, for example, walk into a shoe store and say, bring me the shoes with the lowest overhead, please, you know? I don't need to see the shoes. I don't care to see the shoes. I just want the shoes with the lowest overhead. Or walk out of a shoe store with shoes full of holes and tell our friends you wouldn't believe how low the overhead was on these shoes, you know? But that's exactly how we treat charity. We buy on the basis of price and we don't ask anything about the quality of the programs. The third reason that this question gives donors bad information, and this is, I don't know, sort of the most evil among them, is it uses a mistaken theory of transparency. So some charity tells you, 82 cents on the dollar goes to the cause. You think they're being transparent. In fact, the 82% may be obscuring what's actually going on. Because the percentage of your donation that goes to the cause depends entirely on how the charity defines the cause. And the more broadly they decide to define the cause, the higher the percentage they can tell you is going to the cause. So in the case of our two soup kitchens, what was going on was a little different than what we actually saw. Soup Kitchen A actually had a 20% fundraising cost and a 10% administrative cost, but when it came time to do their reporting, they said, hey, that 20% fundraising cost, we're talking about the cause all the time, so let's call it part of the cause, and we'll report that 90% of people's donations went to the cause. Soup Kitchen B had the identical expenses, but they didn't add the 20% to the cause. They added it to the overhead description, and they told people 70% went to the cause. So two identical sets of expenses, two completely different pictures of efficiency. And worse, Soup Kitchen A is serving rancid soup, doing questionable accounting, and they look much better on paper than Soup Kitchen B, which is serving hearty, nutritious soup and is doing conservative accounting. Now, does this actually happen in the real world? It happens on an epidemic scale. The nonprofit overhead cost study at Indiana University looked at the tax forms of 125,000 nonprofit organizations. That's a massive sample. It's like 10% of the sector. And they found that half of all the organizations and 1/3 of the organizations raising between $1 and $5 million were reporting 0% fundraising expense. Now, how do you raise $5 million a year and not spend a penny doing it? So if it's such a bad question, why do we ask it? Well, we've been trained to ask it. We're trained to ask it by the three watchdog agencies who keep getting talked about by the state's attorneys general, who keep getting referenced in the media, and then sadly, the charities themselves who keep telling you that the things the watchdog agencies tell you are the right things to ask about. So this is, as an example, the Attorney General of the state of Washington telling his constituents what question they should ask about charity.
The types of questions that you can ask?
Well, I would like to know how much of the money I'm donating is going to go to the end purpose as opposed to being sucked up by administration and overhead. And they should be able to tell you what percentage of the money you donate will be used for the right purpose and how much of it will be eaten up by administration and overhead.
Not a word to his constituents about, well, find out if the organization is actually doing any good in the world. Not a word about that. Here's a news program in Missouri. The woman on the street actually gives the right answer, but listen to what the news anchor says about it.
With more than 800,000 organizations, how do you choose where your hard-earned money goes?
You have to have trust in everyone that it's going to go to the right, who they say it's going to.
Wrong answer. Attorney General Jim Nixon and the Better Business Bureau warn consumers, don't donate to charities that eat up more than 35% of your money in administrative costs.
Even if they're trying to grow, even if they're actually trying to solve the social problem. And this is the head of Charity Navigator at Christmas in 2009.
We want to make sure that every single penny that you give, we want to help you to make sure that that giving is as effective as possible so that you can give the most you possibly can to the best charities that are out there. The best charities out there from our research have 75% or more of every dollar that you give going to program services, going to the cause that you care about, and 25% or less to fundraising and administrative overhead. That's the kind of charity you want to look for.
Here's the problem with Ken saying the most effective charities are the ones with the lowest overhead. At the same time on their website it said this, evaluating the effectiveness of a charity's programs is out of our scope. Now it's wildly expensive to measure program effectiveness and really elusive. It's very hard to do. But if you can't do it, don't be going out and telling the public that your research shows that you know which are the best charities. And then the charities reinforce all of this, right? So here's, Ken did say last year overhead ratios and executive salaries are useless for evaluating a nonprofit's impact, which is like hell freezing over. So we're making progress. Here's the American Heart Association. There's the Better Business Bureau seal of approval. Here's the Hunger Project. There are the three watchdog seals of approval. Here's Save the Children. There are the three watchdog seals of approval and the little pie chart showing you how little they spend on overhead. Here's Susan Komen for the Cure. There's the Charity Navigator, Better Business Bureau seal of approval. The worst thing about it is how tiny these watchdog organizations are. So between the three of them, they have a total of 28 staff. Next to nothing compared to the 10 million people employed in the nonprofit sector in America. Between the three of them, they have annual budget money of $3.3 million. Next to nothing compared to the $300 billion Americans donate to charity every year. So I keep saying someone should just buy them. Just buy them. And between them, they look at a total of 7,700 organizations, next to none compared to the, whatever it is, 1.5 million nonprofit organizations in the U.S. So what we have in America as an infrastructure for helping the public to understand the value of the $300 billion given to charity every year is next to no one, spending next to nothing, looking at next to no organizations, and then teaching people to ask the wrong question. With the exception of Charity Navigator, which is now trying to look at questions of effectiveness, but their budget is woefully inadequate to do anything meaningful in that area.